Best known for his charisma and pan-Arab populism, Gamal Abdel Nasser of Egypt captivated listeners through his radio broadcasts and instilled immense pride within Egypt and beyond its borders. During the height of his power in the 1960s, Nasser was often perceived in the West as a troublemaker, a sort of gangster, and a dangerous dictator. Nasser's defiance of old colonial powers in Egypt earned him respect not only domestically but also throughout the region. People across the Middle East rallied behind his anti-colonial fervor, which inspired movements like Iraq's Free Officers, who overthrew their monarchy in 1958, and Muammar Gaddafi, who ousted Libya's pro-Western king and removed foreign military bases from the country. While Nasser's willingness to take risks helped him realize his vision for Egypt and enhance its regional role, it also led to his downfall when he hastily entered a war without fully assessing the costs and benefits. Gamal Abdel Nasser hailed from humble beginnings, born in a modest brick house on an unpaved street in the village of Beni Mur in the Nile Delta, where his father managed the local post office. Life in Beni Mur was marked by financial hardship, as the village lacked resources, and Nasser's family faced economic challenges. This upbringing in an underdeveloped part of Egypt, characterized by poverty and a lack of basic services, significantly influenced his perspective and his aspirations for his nation's future. At an early age, Nasser moved to Cairo to live with an uncle who had been released from a British prison. Egypt, with its history of rule by various entities, including the Mamluks, the Ottoman Empire, and the descendants of Muhammad Ali, had also experienced French and British colonialism. British colonial administration in Egypt reduced funding for education and healthcare to avoid nurturing Egyptian elites, perpetuating a stark divide between the rich and the poor. Financial and trade power lay in the hands of Italians, Syrians, and Armenians, excluding Egyptians from meaningful control over their territory. In 1922, Egypt gained recognition as a sovereign state under a constitutional monarchy led by King Fuad I. However, Britain's colonial influence persisted, as they retained the right to manage Egypt's defense, protect foreigners and minorities, and control the country's defense against external threats. The result was a precarious balance of power between the king, the British High Commissioner, and the Parliament, where the Wafd Party, a nationalist force, held sway. During this period, nationalism and anti-colonialism fervor were widespread in Egypt. While Nasser's family initially avoided involvement in the growing nationalist movement, he became immersed in it. He joined anti-British protests, which eventually led to his imprisonment. By 1936, when he finished school, Nasser had become the chairman of the executive committee of Cairo secondary school students, actively engaging in politics. In 1937, he joined the military academy to become an army officer, where he crossed paths with fellow officers who would play significant roles in Egypt's future, including Anwar Sadat. In 1939, Nasser and other young officers founded a revolutionary nationalist group called the Free Officers Movement. Initially, their goal was to eliminate British military presence, but they later decided that removing the Egyptian monarchy was necessary. King Farouk, the monarch at the time, was perceived as complicit with British imperial interests, and this exacerbated resentment among Egyptians. During World War II, Nasser was sent to Sudan, where he saw limited action in 1942. Upon returning to Cairo, an incident that further fueled his revolutionary zeal occurred when British High Commissioner Miles Lampson, fearing King Farouk's wavering allegiance to the Allied cause, deployed troops to surround the palace. Farouk was coerced into choosing a new prime minister or abdicating the throne, demonstrating British interference in Egyptian affairs. This incident deeply angered Nasser, reinforcing his determination to push for revolutionary change. Nasser's commitment to revolution was heightened by his experiences during the 1948 Arab-Israeli War. As a major in the Egyptian army, he saw action, and his brigade, although eventually surrendering Fallujah to Israel, became national heroes. Egypt's defeat in this war, part of a coalition of Arab states, was perceived as a national humiliation, and blame was often directed at the monarchy. King Farouk, who ascended the throne in 1936, represented the old imperialism and was increasingly viewed as corrupt and self-serving. Poverty, social inequality, and political instability characterized Egypt during his reign, further eroding support for the monarchy. Nasser's deepening involvement in politics and growing dissatisfaction with the status quo set the stage for his pivotal role in Egypt's history. King Farouk was characterized as an arrogant, indulged, and pampered individual from birth. British High Commissioner Miles Lampson once described him as uneducated, lazy, irresponsible, vain, and lacking in truthfulness. Despite these negative traits, King Farouk was immensely wealthy and notorious for his extravagant lifestyle. His fortune included vast land holdings in Egypt, 4 palaces, 2 estates, 13 private aircraft, 200 cars, and purportedly the world's largest collection of explicit material, including explicit photographs. He was known for his pursuit of pleasure and extravagance. King Farouk, although faced with unrest and discontent in Egypt, believed that he had the loyalty of his generals and control over the army. However, his extravagant and scandalous lifestyle, along with allegations that some close associates profited from supplying subpar weapons and ammunition to the military, eroded the army's allegiance. By 1952, Egypt, under King Farouk's rule, was on the brink of revolution. Various factors contributed to this, including the excesses of British military occupation, British interference in Egypt's political affairs, King Farouk's detachment from the plight of his people, and the humiliating defeat of the Egyptian army in a recent conflict. In July 1952, King Farouk received a warning about dissident officers in the army planning a coup. In response, he appointed a new prime minister and his brother-in-law as minister of war to quell the conspirators. However, after being alerted to impending actions against them, Gamal Abdel Nasser and his fellow officers accelerated their plans for revolution, originally scheduled for 1955. The decision to attempt the coup was made on the morning of July 22, 1952. Around midnight, approximately 200 officers and 3,000 troops seized control of the army headquarters, arresting senior officers. They subsequently took control of the airport, the Cairo broadcasting station, and the telecommunications center. Military vehicles patrolled the streets of Cairo. The officers encountered no resistance. On July 23, 1952, at 7 a.m., Anwar el-Sadat announced the takeover on Cairo radio. King Farouk was at Ras el Tin Palace in Alexandria at the time of the revolution. Some officers, including Nasser, favored his immediate public execution, but Nasser guaranteed King Farouk safe passage into exile, leading to his departure. On June 18, 1953, the Egyptian monarchy was officially abolished, and the Republic of Egypt was declared, with General Mohammed Naguib as its first president. Gamal Abdel Nasser enjoyed considerable respect due to his military rank and record. While General Naguib held the presidency, Nasser worked behind the scenes, commanding the newly established Revolutionary Command Council. However, political disagreements between Naguib and Nasser sparked a power struggle. General Naguib, who had become quite popular, favored gradual changes in Egypt, while Nasser advocated for immediate political and economic reforms. In April 1954, Nasser was appointed prime minister, with General Naguib remaining as president. During this period, political forces, including the Muslim Brotherhood, sought power in Egypt. An assassination attempt on Nasser in 1954, allegedly orchestrated by the Muslim Brotherhood, increased tensions. General Naguib was implicated in the plot, further complicating the situation. By the end of 1954, Nasser had solidified his authority as the leader of the free officers and the country. The crackdown on opposition escalated, with thousands of arrests and the declaration of the Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist organization. In 1956, Nasser announced the promulgation of a constitution that established Egypt as a socialist Arab state with a one-party political system, and Islam as the official religion. Nasser's policies aimed to address the exploitative agrarian economy by redistributing land and nationalizing key industries. Education, healthcare, and employment opportunities were extended to all sectors of society, fostering social mobility and poverty alleviation. However, political freedoms and civil liberties were stifled under the Nasser regime, and media was controlled and censored. Egypt's strategic importance, particularly the Suez Canal, made it a crucial nation in international politics. Western powers, including Britain and France, attempted to persuade Nasser to join an anti-Soviet alliance, but Nasser pursued a neutral stance, seeking independence from pro-Western alliances. Many Egyptians found this entire situation unbearable because they viewed it as an example of British imperialism. They believed that true independence could only be achieved once the British had departed. Simultaneously, Nasser's armed forces engaged in sporadic conflicts with Israeli soldiers along the border between the two countries, and the Egyptian leader openly expressed his strong dislike for Israel. Around the same time, in 1956, the United States and Britain reneged on a promise to provide funds to Egypt for the construction of the Aswan Dam on the Nile River. This was due to an Egyptian arms deal with the Soviet Union. Supported by Soviet arms and money and angered by these countries' actions, President Gamal Abdel Nasser announced the nationalization of the Suez Canal Company on July 26, 1956. This company, a joint British-French enterprise, had owned and operated the Suez Canal since its construction in 1869. Nasser argued that tolls from ships passing through the canal would fund the Aswan Dam. The sudden nationalization of the Suez Canal took the world by surprise, making headlines like a bombshell. Egypt's premier, Colonel Nasser, declared that his country was taking over the canal. While Nasser offered full economic compensation for the company, the British and French governments, suspicious of Nasser's opposition to their continued political influence in the region, were outraged. The British secretly sought French support, believing that Nasser supported rebels in the French colony of Algeria. They also sought the support of Israel for an armed assault to retake the canal. Israel initiated the attack on October 29, 1956, with British and French military forces joining 2 days later. The Soviet Union, eager to exploit Arab nationalism and gain influence in the Middle East, opposed the invasion and threatened to launch nuclear missiles on Western Europe if the Triple Alliance of Israel, France, and Britain did not withdraw. The United States intervened in the crisis, warning the Soviets against reckless nuclear conflict and advising against direct intervention. President Dwight Eisenhower issued 10 warnings to the British, French, and Israelis to cease their campaign and withdraw from Egyptian soil. The United States threatened economic sanctions if they persisted in their attack. Under this pressure, British and French forces withdrew by December, and Israel eventually yielded to US pressure, relinquishing control of the canal to Egypt. The Suez Canal was reopened in March 1957. British Prime Minister Anthony Eden resigned 2 months after withdrawing British troops. This episode significantly bolstered Gamal Abdel Nasser's reputation in the Arab world, leading to anti-Western demonstrations and increased Arab nationalism. Nasser's aspiration to unite the Arab world into a single, unified state was initiated with the union of Egypt and Syria as the United Arab Republic, with Nasser as its president. However, Syria withdrew in 1961, leaving Egypt on its own. Nasser's assertive international stance sometimes seemed imprudent, including his ill-fated attempt to support revolutionaries in Yemen against Saudi-backed royalists in 1962. This mission failed, with Nasser referring to the conflict as his Vietnam. The Yemen conflict, which lasted from 1962 to 1967, resulted in significant losses for Egypt. In 1967, increased tensions between Arabs and Israelis prompted Egypt to mobilize its forces and demand the withdrawal of United Nations peacekeepers from the Sinai Peninsula. Egypt, along with other Arab nations, prepared for a united strike against Israel. However, Israel preempted the attack, initiating the Six-Day War with the destruction of Egypt's Air Force on June 5, 1967. This war resulted in a decisive Israeli victory, including the capture of territories like the Sinai Peninsula, Gaza Strip, West Bank, Old City of Jerusalem, and parts of Syria's Golan Heights. Egypt and its Arab allies suffered significant casualties, while Israel's losses were comparatively low. Following the military disaster, Nasser attempted to resign but was persuaded to stay in office due to popular demonstrations and a vote of confidence. He continued to face health issues, and by 1969, his health had significantly deteriorated. On September 20, 1970, President Gamal Abdel Nasser passed away from a heart attack at the age of 52. He was succeeded by Anwar el-Sadat.